Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, let's try to solve one more real SQL interview problem. This time it was shared to me by Muthu in my email and he faced this problem during a recent SQL interview. Now straight away, let's look at the problem and try to solve it. So this is the problem statement that was given to me in my email. We'll try to read this email, try to understand the input data and the expected output, and then we will try to solve it. Okay. Now remember, I will be solving this using the PostgreSQL database and the PG admin tool. But of course, the solution is going to work in any other RDBMS as well. But there will be a slight difference in some of the inbuilt functions that I might be using. Okay. So if you refer to my blog, and the link to my blog will be present in the video description, you will find the data set, the problem statement and everything else that I'll be using in this video, and I will be sharing my solution in PostgreSQL as well as in Microsoft SQL Server in my blog. Okay, but in this video I'll be solving it using PostgreSQL. Okay, so straight away let's try to understand this problem statement. So the name of this problem is basically given as most modified extensions, and they are telling that a database contains the list of file names including their extensions and the dates they were last modified. Okay, so if I go down, you can see here I have a table with an ID column, a date modified column and a file name column. The file name column also has the file extension, as you can see here. Okay, and that is what they mentioned here. Okay, and then they are saying for each date that a modification was made, return the date, the extensions of the files that were modified the most. Okay, so for each date that is present in this table, we need to find the extension of the files that were modified the most. Okay, we'll try to understand that when I show you the data in detail. Okay, and then they are telling return the number of files modified that date. So that's the first part of the problem that is given, and they're saying there is one more additional condition. If more than one file extension ties for the most modifications, return them as comma delimited list in reverse alphabetical order. Okay, as an example, see the row of output in the example below. So let's try to understand this. Okay, so here they have given us the input data and then they have given us the expected output. Okay, now understanding this data from this email might be a little difficult, so I have basically copied the same thing into an Excel file, as you can see here. Now here you can see that for each date, whenever a modification was done, it's mentioned what is the file that was modified along with their extensions. Okay, but you can see here the data is actually not sorted in any proper order, so it would be a little difficult for us to understand what's happening here and then try to understand how this output should be formed. So to make it more easier for you to understand, what I have done is I have basically copied the same input data into another tab, as you can see here, and here I have just sorted the data as per this date modified column. So basically all the data is sorted as per the date modified, so it becomes easier for us to look at this input data and then try to understand this data and then see what actually are they expecting in the expected output. Okay, so now if you see here, I can see that I have 4 records for 1st June 2021, and I can see here the files that were modified is I have one .py file, then there is a .pptx file, then there is another .py file, and then there is another .pptx file. And what we are expected to do in the problem statement is that we need to find for each date that a modification was made. So when they say for each date that a modification was made, we basically need to consider all of these dates that is present in our input table. Okay, and for each of this date, because I know that each of this date is the date when there was some modification, and that is why there is an entry in this table, right? That's the first thing. We need to find for each of this date the extension of the files that were modified the most. Okay, this part is important, modified the most. Okay, now you can see here for 1st June 2021, I can see that .py file was modified twice. Basically there are two .py files and there is .pptx file which is also present twice. So if I go to my output for 1st June 2021, I can see that I have both the py file, then there is a comma, and the pptx file, and the count is 2. Okay, what this means is the most modified file extension for 1st June 2021 is both .py and the pptx file, and you can see that the most number of times they were modified is 2. Right, so that is why I have py comma pptx twice. Okay, now similarly if I go to 2nd June 2021, I can see that pptx is present once and csv is present one, and that is why I have both pptx and csv in my output, and the count is 1 because the most modified file extension is both pptx and csv, and they both were modified just once. Now when I go to the 3rd June, I think this will be more clear. Okay, so if you see 3rd June data, I can see that I have 6 records and I have a SVG file, then I have 3 PDF file, then I have a JPEG file, and then I have a .py file. Okay, now the most modified extension here is PDF, because PDF file was modified. Basically 3 PDF files were modified on 3rd June 2021. Okay, and that is why here my output I have only PDF. Okay, but then you see the count here is 3, because this PDF file, basically 3 PDF files were modified, and that is why I have 3. So don't confuse with this problem statement, because the problem statement here might be a little confusing, and that is why sometimes if you don't understand clearly, or if there is any confusion looking at the problem statement, it's very important to look at the expected output, then your confusion might get clear. Okay, because here the problem statement states that we need to find the number of files modified that date. Okay, now if I just look at that, the number of files modified that date, I could say that SVG is 1, PDF is 1, JPEG is 1, and PY is 1. So 4 type of files were modified. So probably some of you might think that here the output should be 4, but here the expected output that is given by them itself, it is 3. Okay, so what basically they are telling is whatever the most modified file is, in this case that is PDF, we need to say how many PDF files were modified, that is 3, and that is what is returned here. Okay, and the same thing happens when we go to 4th June. You can see here PY file is basically present twice. Okay, so here the count is 2, and that is why that is what is returned here. Okay, and then on 5th June only one file was modified, that is pptx. So that is what I have, pptx, and the count is 1. Okay, when I go to 6th June, I have py once, and then I have py twice, and then I have the docx file again twice, as you can see here. Okay, so both py and docx should be mentioned in my output, and the most number of times any of these files were modified is 2, because py was modified twice and docx file was also modified twice, and that is why my final output here has 2. Okay, so I have spent some time to explain you what is the input and what is the expected output. I hope this is clear and there is no confusion on this. Now let's try to solve this problem. So in order to solve this problem, I will be solving it in PostgreSQL, and I'm using the pgadmin tool. I have created a table called files. It is having basically the same data that you can see here that was given in our input. Okay, now in order to make it more clear, I'm just going to sort this data, let's say by my second column, that is date modified. Okay, so now you can see that all the data is sorted for each modified date. Okay, now we need to solve this problem, but as I always tell, whenever you have a complex or an intermediate problem to solve, it's always better to kind of break the problem into multiple small parts. Okay, so in order to solve this problem, there are a few different things that we can do. So let's see what is the first thing that we need to do. So in this data, the only thing that I am interested in is the file extension. I am not bothered about what the file name is. I only need to fetch the file extension, and then based on the file extension for each date modified, I need to do some manipulations and calculations, right? So my very first thing that I need to do is fetch the file extension. Right, this is my very first thing. So I can easily do that by using some inbuilt functions in PostgreSQL. I think I can use the position function and the substring function, and I think substring is supported in every other RDBMS, but we'll see that in detail when I am going to write the query. Okay, so that's the first thing. What is the second thing? So once I get my file extension, then for each of this modified date, I want to count how many of each of these file extensions are present in my table. That is, in other words, for each day, how many times a file extension was modified. Okay, so I can just tell for each day how many times each file extension was modified. Okay, so what I would basically get is for 1st June, I would get py was modified twice and pptx was modified twice, and same way for each other day, I would get that count. Okay, why do I need that count is because in my third step, what I can do is I only need to fetch those records where the file extension was modified the most number of times. So basically what I can say is, again, for each day, fetch the most modified file extension from my point 2. Okay, so here I would have the count for each file extension for each day. From this, I will see what is the maximum, okay, which file extension was modified the most number of time, and only those records I'll fetch it from my point 3. Okay, and my final point, basically the last thing that I need to do to basically solve this problem is, if there is a type, Okay, so if there is a tie, when I say tie, it basically if for a day, and I can see that for this particular day I have a tie because py was modified twice and pptx file was also modified twice. So if there is a tie, then I need to do a concatenation of the file extension. So if there is a tie, then concatenate or stitch them together. Okay, I'll just write concatenate the multiple file extensions. Okay, so these are the 4 things that I need to do in order to solve this problem. Okay, now let's try to go one by one. So my very first step is to fetch the file extension. So let's try to do that. Here I'm just going to say, I'll just write this whole query again. So select star from files. Maybe I'll just move this to the next line. And here I'll say I'm not bothered about this ID column. I actually don't need that. Okay. So I only need the date modified and the file extension. So I'm just going to say date modified. Okay. That's my very first column that I need. And then let's say I also need file name for now. Okay. And then what I need is from this file name, I only need to extract the file extension. So how I can do that is I can use the substring, and using substring I can basically fetch a part of the string, right? But here in order to find that part of the string, first of all I need to know where the file extension is, and I know that a file extension will always come after this dot symbol, right, or the dot character, right? So first thing is I need to find where the dot is in this file name column. So in order to find the dot, I can use the position inbuilt function in PostgreSQL. And if you're using Microsoft SQL Server, you can use the char index function. If you're using Oracle, I think you can use the instr function. And no matter what other RDBMS you are using, you will have some inbuilt function to basically find the position of a particular character in a string. Okay, so here I'm just going to say position, and I think the syntax is I need to say, okay, so I need to say dot. I'm finding for dot in the column name, that is file name, right? And I think let me just execute this and see if I'm getting the output. I'm getting it an error. Okay, so the table name was wrong. Now let me run this, and now you can see that I am getting the position of the dot character in my file name column. So if I look at this record here, it is redrag.py. So redrag is 6 characters and the 7th character is the dot character, and that is what is mentioned here. Okay, so I have got the position of dot for every file name here. Okay, now using this, if I use my substring, I can basically extract the file extension. So let's do that. So I'm just going to say substring, and here I'm just going to say file name. Okay, and then here I'm going to say that you need to start the substring from this position after the dot, right? So this position here, I'm just going to put this inside the parenthesis. This is going to return me, let's say 7 here. I don't want to include the dot. I want to include the characters after the dot, right? So here I'll just tell +1. So this should hopefully return me only the file extension. So only 2 arguments, because if I don't provide the third argument, it will fetch all the characters until the end. So here I'm just going to name it like, let's say file extension. Okay. And now if I run this, now you can see that this column here is basically returning me all the file extensions. So basically I have done this part just by using 2 inbuilt functions, substring and position. So this is fine, and I actually don't need these 2 columns. So I'm just going to remove them, and I'm just going to execute this, and you can see now for each day I'm getting the file extension. Now just to make it more clear, I'm going to sort the data based on the date modified column. So I'm just going to say order by date modified, and I think I'll just run this, and now you can see for 1st June 2021 I have these file extensions. Okay, now this is fine. My next step that I need to do is for each day, how many times each file extension was modified. So basically, since I need to do it for each day and I need to find for each file extension, I can use the group by clause. Okay, so I need to use group by before the order by. So I'm just going to say here group by date modified. That is definitely required, but I also need to include the file extension, because for each day or for some of the days there might be multiple file extension, and I need to know the count for each file extension. Each file extension was modified how many times for each day, right? So I also need to include the file extension column here. And also I'll include the count function here so that I get the count, and I'm going to name it like, let's say CNT. Okay, and now let me run this. And now you can see that for each day, I am getting the count of the file extensions that were modified in that day. Okay, so here you can see for 1st June, pptx was modified twice, py was modified twice. And let's say if I go to 3rd June, I can see svg was modified once, py was modified once, but PDF file was modified 3 times, and a JPEG file was modified once. Okay, now this is basically my second step. I have got the count, or basically how many times each file extension was modified on each day. Okay, now the third thing that I need to do is, for each day I need to fetch the most modified file extension. So for example, on 1st June, the most modified file extension is both pptx and py, because they both were modified twice. Okay, and if I go to 2nd June, the most modified file extension is again pptx and csv, because both of them were modified just once. Okay, but if I go to 3rd June, you can see that the most modified file extension is only pdf file, because pdf was modified 3 times. Okay, so I need to basically filter out this query such that I only fetch the most modified file extension for each day. Now, how can I do that? I can do that, of course, in many different ways, but one of the ways that I can think is I can put this whole query into a CTE, okay, and then probably I can use a correlated subquery to do that. So let's try to do that. So first of all, I'm going to put this into a CTE. So I'm just going to say with CTE as, and I'll just move this to the right, and I'll put this inside the parentheses. Okay, since I'm inside a CTE, I actually don't need this order by, so I'll just remove that. And here I'm just going to write select star from my CTE, and I think if I run this, I'll still get the same output. Okay, but what I basically need is, maybe I'll just move down. I need to only extract those records where there is the most file extensions, right? So in order to do that, I'm going to put a filter condition here. I'm just going to say where, and what I need to do is, I know that for each day, so maybe I'll just put an order by here just to make it more clear, order by 1. So that it becomes easier for me to explain. You can see here, I'll just take the example of this particular day, that is 3rd June. Okay, so for 3rd June, I only want to fetch this record number 7 that you can see here, that is with PDF. Okay, how I can do that is, I know that the count is 3 here, and this is the max count that is for each day. Okay, so for each day, I need to fetch only those records where the count is the max for that day. Okay, so what I can say is where CNT is equal to, here I can put a subquery. Okay, so in this case, I'll try to use a correlated subquery, and I'm going to explain that why. Okay, so I'll just tell select max of CNT from CTE, because again I can use this CTE. Okay, so if I just leave it like this, then what will happen is max of count from the CTE, basically it will fetch the max of all of this record, but I want to find the max of count for each day, right? So whatever day that is processing in my main query here, for that day I want to find the max of count. So how I can do that is, first of all, let me give an alias here. I'll call this like C1, and I'll call this like C2, and here I'll just tell C2 dot date modified is equal to C1 dot date modified. Okay, sorry, C1 dot date modified. Okay, so with this, what happens is, when this particular main query is processing the 3rd June record, let's say this particular record or any of this record, here the date modified will be 3. So only for this 3rd June 2021, it is going to fetch the max of count, that will be 3, and from these 4 records, hopefully it will filter out to fetch only 1 record. Okay, I hope I'm not confusing you guys too much, and you are able to understand what I'm trying to explain here. Okay, now I think this is fine. Let me try to execute this and see if it works. And you can see that it is working fine. The number of records have decreased, because now for each day I'm only fetching those records where the file extension modified, basically we have the most modified file extension. Okay, so for 1st June 2021, I have both py and pptx. For 2nd June 2021, again I have both pptx and csv, but for 3rd June I only have pdf, because only pdf was modified the most, that is 3 times, right? So I have basically got my third part of this solution. Now only one thing is remaining, and that is, you can see for some of the days, multiple files have been modified same number of times. Okay, so these both files are the most modified files, and I need to include both of them in my output. Okay, but in my output, when I'm including them, I need to basically put them together or concatenate them together, and I need to have a comma. Basically, I need to separate them using a comma, as you can see here. Okay, and when I am basically merging them together, I need to sort them in the reverse alphabetical order as mentioned here. Okay, so let's try to do all of that in our last step. So in order to basically, so what I need to do is, these 2 records, I need to merge them together, and I need to bring pptx and py together, right? Now in PostgreSQL, I can easily do that by using one of the inbuilt functions, that is string underscore aggregate, and the same function will, I think, work in other RDBMS as well. So what I'm going to be doing is, here I'm just going to say date modified, okay, and in my next line I'm just going to say string underscore aggregate, and I'm going to aggregate the file extension column, and my separator is going to be a comma, okay, and maybe I'm going to name this like, let's say, what is my second column called? It is extension, right? So I'm just going to name it like extension, okay, and then I have a third column as well, that is my count, okay, and that count is basically the count that I'm already getting here, okay. So what I want to do is this, since I'm using the string aggregate function, I need to group the data based on date modified, because I need to get my result that is for each day, right? So for each day there should be only one record. So I'm going to group the data based on each date. So group by date modified, okay, that's one thing. And here when I'm fetching the count, I only want to fetch basically one record, right? If I use count, I'm going to get an error because I'm grouping the data based on date modified only. So I'm just going to say max of count, okay, and I'm going to name this like, let's say, what is it? It is count, okay. So I'll just use the same name as present in the expected output. And now let me try to run this, and you can see that I am getting my final result, okay. So for 1st June 2021, I am getting pptx and py, and the count is 2, and for 2nd June I'm getting pptx and csv, and count is 1, and this is basically exactly the same, I think, as required in my expected output. But there is one difference. The difference is, here you can see that I have py comma pptx, but here I have pptx comma py. So this, when I have merged the two values together, I did not sort the values in the reverse alphabetical order, okay, or in the descending order. So I can basically do that easily by passing an order by clause here. So I can just tell in my string aggregate function, after I mention the separator, I can sort the values. So I'll just tell order by file extension in descending order, okay. And now if I run this, I think it should work. So now you can see that I have pptx and 2. So if I go here, I have pptx and 2, then I have pptx and csv 1, then I have pdf 3, as you can see here, then I have py2, pptx 1, and finally py and docx 2, okay, py and docx 2. So this is basically the final output. I hope this is clear. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any other solutions to the same problem, definitely share them in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and see you soon in the next one. Bye.